and Bendy.
Hello and welcome to Waldy and Bendy's Adventures in Art, the podcast they could not stop. I'm Waldemar Januszczak, art critic of the Sunday Times, but at school they called me Waldy. And as this podcast has high educational ambitions, you too can call me Waldy. Now I'm joined by a man who's been described as the Tam O'Shanter of art history. Yes, he likes a drink. Yes, he lives in Scotland. And yes, every time he opens his mouth, all we hear is poetry. He is, of course, Bendy Grosvenor, art historian, art dealer, art legend. Bendy, so how are things up there in the Highlands?
Top form, thank you, Waldy. And art legend, I'll go with that. Former art dealer, I should say. But as I always have to remind you, I'm the mere ground layer to your oil paint, Waldy. I am the gypsum to your vermilion.
Oh, I see. So you're just the stuff that gets covered up, Bendy, by me. Is that right?
Indeed.
Well, that's not true, is it? As we're about to find out. Particularly because, now, as you know, Bendy, one of the most marvellous things about Scotland is that there are lots of golf courses up there. And some of those golf courses are owned by a certain Donald John Trump, who's been in the news a lot recently, as you know. So we thought we'd make this podcast an American art special, which it sort of is. And also by a remarkable coincidence, the kind of coincidence that only the gods of art can arrange. 2020 happens to be the 435th anniversary of the arrival in America of John White. And if that isn't a dodgy anniversary, then nothing is. Dodgy anniversary. Now, we're going to find out about John White in a moment, and I should just tell you quickly that there's a special podcast page at zczfilms.com with all the pictures that Bendy and I talk about. So just go to zczfilms.com and it's all there. But yes, John White. What do you know about him, Bendy?
Very little, in fact. Was he important?
He was very important because he was basically the first Western artist to arrive in America. Certainly the first we know about. So he turned up in 1585 at the island of Roanoke. You may have heard of Roanoke. It was the first attempted colony in America.
Yes, I've been there.
And then afterwards, there was a sort of infamous situation, so-called lost colony, where all the colonists disappeared. But John White, in fact, was a governor of Roanoke even at one point. But he turned up. He was sent there by Walter Raleigh. And the thing about him was that he was a colonist, a gentleman, but he was also an artist. And he has left behind an amazing sequence of over 200 watercolours, which are the first, and indeed pretty much the only images we have of America in the 16th century. So we see a lot of Native Americans here, and that's what makes this such an interesting and unique contribution. So there are watercolours of how they lived, of what the people did, and some beautiful ones of animals and fauna and flora from the area, botanical drawings. And this is 1585, this is Elizabethan era in England, and they're just so ahead of their time and amazing. And so I just wanted to start off with him because he's underexplored, I think, and certainly under-celebrated.
Yes, and I've had a look at some of White's pictures, and I mean, they're not technically brilliant, but they do have that fascinating moment I love in art history when someone from one part of the world arrives in another and has some artistic gift and is able to explore all the things they've never seen before. You can feel their eyes popping out on stalks, can't you, as they try and record these amazing dances and animals and plants they've never seen. It's a fascinating moment in art history, and we're so lucky that these have survived. Goodness.
They're in the British Museum, and I've never seen them actually because they never take them out. They're so fragile. Watercolors are very difficult at the best of times, so I've never seen them. But they must have been known about, a bit at the time, because there's certain sort of images that get picked up and used. And of course, what we mustn't forget is that for a lot of people, America, or rather the New World, was thought to be kind of paradise. It was the rediscovery of paradise. So everybody who arrived there had this sort of heightened sense, religious underpinning. That's why the Americans think of themselves as the chosen people. There's this sense that they discovered paradise. And so the art there is inflected or infused with this sense of a kind of extraordinarily other reality. There's a famous John White watercolor of Algonquin Indians dancing in a circle around some figures in the middle. And I've read suggestions that, the central scene of The Garden of Earthly Delights by Hieronymus Bosch, where we see a kind of a sort of paradise going wrong in the middle, and there is this big circle of figures running around being decadent. I've read suggestions that that image may have been inspired by early accounts of how the Native Americans in America behaved and did, and what their ceremonies were about. So this isn't just art. This is a kind of clash of religious systems, of beliefs. And that big divide, that huge divide between the Western viewpoint and the Native American viewpoint, I think infiltrates American art and always kind of annoys it and pushes it about and makes it different.
Yes. I mean, it's interesting to try and work out at what point American art actually begins, because it seems to hover for so long somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic, doesn't it? And that's one of the things I've always found very interesting about American art, or rather, should we say, art produced in America, is that for a nation born in a moment of revolution and some violence, that was a moment of sort of creative blank canvas in a way, wasn't it? But it took so long for what we might call an authentic modern American vision to come through in American art. And for the first, I don't know, first 100 years probably, is that too much of an exaggeration to say that for the first century, American art really tries quite hard to be British in a way, or certainly European, doesn't it? I mean, the early sort of what we might call the founding fathers of American art, people like Gilbert Stuart and Copley and Benjamin West, they spend a lot of their time being in England, don't they, and trying to paint like English artists, trying to paint like Joshua Reynolds or Sir Thomas Lawrence, and they take that style back to them. And then that infuses what Americans perceive as good taste. You get people like Henry Clay Frick trying to equip their modern palaces like the dining room of a duke in England. So they buy all these Gainsboroughs and Reynolds portraits, and they even go for names we don't consider to be tremendously important nowadays, like James Northcote. They idolize these British 18th century portrait artists, and then suddenly the really exciting moment is when it all changes in the early 20th century, when you do, I think, get that authentic American voice. People like George Bellows, who are so fantastically exciting.
Yes, I mean, and of course, a lot of the early American artists were Europeans. Someone like Thomas Moran, who's the great sort of the Turner of American landscape, painted these enormous views of the Grand Canyon, amazing pictures. They're forged by my pal Sean Greenhouse. Used to do a good line in Thomas Moran's. Sold a couple to Bolton Museum as a tribute to Moran's birthplace in Bolton. But Thomas Moran or some of the Hudson River School, these were artists who came over from Europe and brought with them their aesthetic, isn't it? And the posh people in America, that's what they wanted, isn't it? They wanted to feel connected to Europe, and it's still a big ambition of theirs. And of course, just to go back to the Native Americans, who are there all the time, remember, and who are also making art all the time, remember, but it's a kind of art that was never recognized as art. I mean, in fact, I read somewhere that the Native Americans didn't even have a word for art. They made beautiful things like totem poles or these amazing baskets that they made, these Californian basket tribes. And they used to make baskets that were so finely woven that they could carry water in them without the water dripping. I mean, just amazing technical resources. But those sorts of skills were appreciated by that Native American society, but they were very different from the kinds of artistic skills that the posh people, on the East Coast liked. So there was a sense in which Native American art was basically forgotten for 200, 300, 400 years nearly, wasn't it? Until much later in the 20th century, when people began to look at it again, and it suddenly began to have quite a powerful impact. So it is this interesting dichotomy all the time, this kind of battle between what's there and which is ignored, and this imported European taste. And if I had to sum up American art, I would say that it's a sort of search for something American, which took an awfully long time to happen, because all the time at the beginning they were led astray.
Which is not unusual, isn't it? I mean, if we look at the story of British art, it takes, if we say our story of early modern British art starting in about 1500 as year dot, I know that's a terrible simplification, but let's take that as a starting point. It still takes 2 centuries for an authentically British school of art to emerge, doesn't it? As opposed to art that's made in Britain by foreign artists like Van Dyck and Holbein, who come over from the continent. So in the long scheme of art history, that's not unusual. In fact, do you think you could possibly look at American art history and say that only now we're beginning to get that authentic American vision of American art, which includes the full extent of American voices and experience in terms of their political and cultural history? I mean, I find it so interesting that what we consider to be the big names of American art for, say, the 60s, 70s, and 80s, it's all the old white dudes, isn't it? And that's beginning to change a bit now. And perhaps now we're only beginning to see a sort of emerging of the full spectrum of American experience in visual art.
Well, that's certainly true, and we can actually, we can go on to that. I just want to hold you back a minute, then. However, so when do you think was the first genuinely American art made? What period? What do you think could be called a real and authentic and individual American art?
Well, we have to define what we mean by American. But if we mean authentically American art that reflects modern
the spirit
America,
of America,
spirit
it
of
couldn't
America.
have happened anywhere else. Let me put it that way. Art that could not have happened anywhere else.
Difficult question, but I would go to artists a little bit like people like Winslow Homer and Norman Rockwell, who I really like. And I know it's a bit like saying you like Beryl Cook in England, but artists who are formed from the American experience. So Winslow Homer, for example, is formed out of graphic art and making illustrations for newspapers and magazines about the American Civil War. So that's a moment of American experience, isn't it? And Norman Rockwell, well, he covers everything from the birth of the motor car to man standing on the moon. And he captures and draws and paints it all for public consumption. So he's formed by the American experience. So I would look at people like that. Am I hopelessly wrong?
Well, I don't know if you're wrong. No. I mean, you're never wrong, Bendy. I think it is abstract expressionism. I think that was, for all its male macho-ness, etc., it was the first kind of art that was uniquely American, could not have been made anywhere else. The size of it, the bombast of it, even the machismo,
Yes.
But also, I mean, we know that Jackson Pollock was massively influenced by the sand art of the Navajo. The Navajo used to make pictures by dropping sand onto the ground in colored patches, and he used to watch that when he was working with his father in the desert. And we know that Barnett Newman was influenced by Navajo rugs in the stripes and things. In my innocence, I like to think that abstract expressionism at its best managed to marry abstract traditions from Europe with this Native American thing, which was completely different. It made art have a sort of potency, a sort of magical sense. It made it big in ways that you couldn't make some of those pictures in Europe, could you? You couldn't paint a Jackson Pollock in Paris. There isn't the room. And once that happened, you've got a few American movements that were sort of gloriously of America. Land art, for example, in the 60s and 70s. I mean, you can't make land art in Britain. You've got great artists here like Andy Goldsworthy who make little things in streams, but you can't have like Roden Crater. There's a James Turrell piece where he's reshaping an entire volcano in the painted desert. I mean, no one's going to do that here. There was that sense of American art finding itself, I think, with abstract expressions. But you're absolutely right. The downside of that is that it was macho and it represented a pretty sort of specific area of American society and needed to be overthrown. And that's certainly happening now.
Yes. And then I agree with you. I do like abstract expressionism. I have to persuade myself to like it because I'm such a reactionary stick in the mud. I mean, there's only so many Rothkos I can look at. And I was watching your series on the BBC at the moment. Well, we should mention that. Lovely.
Yes, it's on iPlayer. Yes, it's Big Skies, Big Dreams, Big Art. It's all about the history of American art, and it's got Thomas Moran in it and all those people.
But I was looking at your piece in the Rothko Chapel, and I'm talking from a position of great ignorance because I've never been there. But it did strike me that it just looks like the decorators have left early. I'm not sure I could get the same kind of spiritual zing that you obviously got from it. Perhaps that was the lighting in your TV show.
Oh, I can't believe you said that. Look, you have to give yourself to art. It's all about the communion between the artwork and you. And you've got to be ready for that. You've got to give yourself to it. If you give yourself to it, it's a glorious experience. Now, you just got to trust me on that. Come on.
Okay. So, well, let's. I'll trust you on abstract expression. How about this for my next gross generalization, probably designed to wind you up. That is the high point of the immediate period of modern American art that we're discussing, and then sort of early 1970s, late 1960s, it all starts to go horribly wrong when the money takes over. And you get this terrible commodification of art that allows it. It's purposely designed to be as traded as easily as a stock and a share on Wall Street, isn't it? So all these endless Warhol series of screen prints that are designed to be sold in multiple editions, and pop art and Roy Lichtenstein. Would you agree with me that that's where it starts to get increasingly absurd and banal?
Yes, I think that I agree with you about the commercialization and the art of the deal became imposed on the art world, and the prices went ridiculously high, and we're seeing the results of that even now. But there were still good things being done in America. I'm a great fan of minimalism. See, I love Carl Andre, I love Donald Judd, Sol LeWitt. Minimalism stood in opposition to all that. It stood in opposition to pop art. It was about a sort of a search for kind of underlying simple truths in the American landscape. And again, it was inspired by America in ways that were exciting and specific. So I think there were good things being done. Of course, it all got very corrupt. And you know, as an ex-art dealer, you know full well what America brought to the mercantile situation in art. I mean, it ruined so much. And that's also why it's good at the moment, because American art has opened out. We've got a lot of African-American artists doing really exciting things. My hero, Njideka Akunyili Crosby, and Deborah Roberts. I love all that. And we've got women coming through in huge numbers. And you think of the importance of someone like Cindy Sherman. Yeah. These are massively important figures in art. So I think, yes, I mean, American art at the moment is really exciting because it's got all this new blood coming in from areas that have previously not been represented. No arguments there.
And although it's terrible for the people having to live through it, nothing fires the creative imagination of a nation than a bit of political conflict. And we've certainly got that at the moment, haven't we?
Oh, I haven't noticed. Where's that then, Bendy?
So perhaps we might be on the verge of a new golden era of American art. I think it's a very exciting moment.
Yes. Well, I think with that, yes. I think there's been a sort of golden era recently. Anyway, listen, this is a completely hopeless conversation. You and I trying to encapsulate American art in 10 minutes on a podcast. What a stupid idea. Was this your idea? Or?
It was my idea, but we like to think big, and it's an American moment, and we should do something for our one American listener, if he's still there, or she's still there. Hello?
Hello, listener in Ohio. You'll be pleased to hear that we are just finishing this ridiculous conversation. The impossible task of summing up American art in just 10 minutes. Of course we failed. How could we not have failed? So I think we need to move on sharpish, Bendy, to the next chapter of this podcast, because American art isn't the only big subject in the news this week. There's also been much talk of statues, and especially bad ones. And that's why, yes, the Waldy and Bendy Awards are back. And this time, we're looking for Britain's worst statue.
The Waldy and Bendy Awards.
Yes, the gods of art have answered everybody's prayers. The Waldy and Bendy Awards are back. And we're back because this week, as everybody will know, there's been a bit of a controversy, hasn't there, about a Maggie Hambling sculpture. It's a statue devoted to Mary Wollstonecraft, the great pioneer of English feminism, that's gone up in Newington Green in London. I think it's fair to say, Bendy, that it hasn't been welcomed with open arms.
No, there's been a fair amount of criticism, and I've sort of been tempted to join in, but I haven't seen it, so I have to be cautious. And then we always have to remember, don't we, that in art history, the thing that tends to have been heralded as a terrible disaster and matter of controversy usually ends up having the last laugh and being a universally adored artwork, doesn't it? So perhaps we should give this one a little bit more time.
I must have missed all those occasions. I'm not saying it never happened, but not often. Look, I haven't seen it either. I have seen lots of photographs of it, and I've seen it on the news. And I know Maggie Hambling's work from earlier days. I mean, what people seem to be moaning about is the fact that it has nothing to do with Mary Wollstonecraft. That there's a kind of feminine mass of some kind representing the female spirit, and that's emerging from the grass. And on top is this rather weird nude woman who looks a bit like a superhero. She's got that androidy lack of detail about her, except in her lady garden, which is luxurious and unmissable. And so the complaints have been that this is absolutely nothing to do with Mary Wollstonecraft, nothing to do with feminism, it's nothing to do with anything really. So I get that, and it's not me that's complaining, it's writers and feminist writers who've been looking at it.
Yes. I mean, I did sort of, there's even a headline in The Guardian of a piece entitled "Why I Hate the New Mary Wollstonecraft Statue." And I just thought it was a bit unnecessary. I mean, that's very strong, isn't it, to really hate something that's been done with love and care. And it has some merit, I think. I mean, I like the bottom, I should say the base. I mean, the bottom part of it. This has a sort of certain Rodin elegance. You're right. The thing on top is a little bit curious. I think it needs time to bed in this artwork, and maybe it'll become more loved. I don't know. It's already started to be vandalized by people putting little knitwear clothes on it, so that probably doesn't bode very well.
It's the trouble with public sculpture, isn't it? It is asking for it. Everybody would sort of pop up and say their little bit about it. But let's put that aside for a moment, because
Well, just before we move on, it's not of Mary Wollstonecraft, it's for Mary Wollstonecraft. And if we're to see this sculpture as something to get people talking about Mary Wollstonecraft, well, then it's certainly succeeded, hasn't it? But I suppose the ultimate test is, would we like to be commemorated in that manner? If someone was going to put up a statue to you in 100 years' time, which I'm sure they will, Waldy, and there you are, climbing on top of a mound of broken canvases and frames and bits of sculpture, standing there in all your glory, would you be happy with that or not?
Would I be nude?
Entirely nude, all your glory. I mean, anatomically correct, everything about you perfect.
Look, you can't do that to the world. I mean, there'll be people lining up saying, the new Hercules, and all that. There'll be envy flooding through the nation. No, none of that. Well, we need to move on to the real topic here, which is, I think public sculpture is always controversial. In my estimation, it's so often really bad. It's a very curious thing. So, of course, the Waldy Bendy Awards are back, and what we're going to be doing here, this is your idea again, Bendy, is deciding on the 5 worst bits of public statuary in Britain. And I think this is a really good point to go to zczfilms.com and look at the pictures we're talking about, because you can really see the horrors that are out there. So, Bendy, take us away. What are we going to be doing here?
Well, we've got a short list of 5. The rules are they have to be extant, that is standing now for people to go and admire or not admire. They have to be in Britain. And you and I and Taya have totted up some scores. And here they are in ascending order of badness. At number 5 is the memorial to the comedian Ernie Wise in Morley, near Leeds, which is by Melanie Wilkes. And this is an artwork that's carved, I think, in sandstone. He looks like he's toppled over. He's holding an umbrella. And I think that the best thing you could say about it is that it might win a sandcastle competition on the beach somewhere. But other than that, it's struggling to convince.
Yes, but I agree with you about the least worst aspect. Amongst the sins it doesn't commit is it's not very expensive. I mean, apparently it only costs something like £8,000 or £10,000, which is peanuts compared to some of the other stuff that's coming up in this list. And a comedian, Ernie Wise, it looks a bit like Barney Rubble out of the Flintstones. He's sort of falling over. He's crudely hacked out of sandstone. There's an artistic modesty, I think, to the sculptor's ambition here, which strikes a chord with me. Ernie Wise was the straight man to Eric Morecambe, and this is a kind of loser sculpture. I rather like it. I'm fond of it in the way that you might be fond of orphans or stray cats or something. There's a plaintiveness to it.
I think you raise a very important point about the budget. And I have to say, I have looked at some of the artists' other more abstract works online, and they're perfectly acceptable. So I'm not meaning to be too unkind. There may have been other limitations here that explain why the umbrella he's holding looks a bit like a candy cane. But poor old Ernie, inevitably, there is a statue not far away of Eric Morecambe which completely overshadows this. So that's Ernie's destiny, really, isn't it? Shall we move on? In 4th place, we have something called the Meeting Place, which is in St Pancras Station. Anyone who's arrived at St Pancras by Eurostar cannot have failed to have missed it. It's a huge bronze, two figures embracing, having a kiss, I think, and it's by an artist called Paul Day. This was made in 2007. Has this ever struck you as something fitting to welcome you to London?
Yeah, I wish I could have struck it with something big. I think this is ghastly. I would have had it much higher up the list. In other words, I think it's much worse than the fourth worst. It's a piece of magazine illustration, isn't it? This twee idea of, I think that's the artist himself and his French wife. He was chosen because he has a French wife and lives in France.
Oh.
So there is a symbolism of the artist being someone who joins France to England, just as St Pancras railway station does. But it's that awful illustrative type of sculpture, which I think is probably the worst kind there is. I would rather someone made a grotesque mistake in a search for exaggeration or symbolism or big expression, rather than make this a timid thing, which honestly, it is a sculptural equivalent of the cover of a Mills and Boon book. And it lacks any sense of genuine invention. And it's, whatever it is, 9 meters tall. Gigantic, great thing. But the only good thing about it was I remember reading a few years ago that originally the sculptor, there's a frieze around the bottom. So you've got this kissing couple and she's all very French and lifts her leg up, coyly. But around the bottom, there's a frieze representing the history of the railways. And apparently at one point, he had a scene in there of somebody falling under a train on the underground and being killed. And London Transport stepped in and asked him to remove it. You see, now that if that had been there would have been a nugget of reality to all this. But no, I think it's ghastly, and I would have had it higher up in the bad list than fourth.
It's the wrong place. It's the wrong scale. It's the wrong color. It's the wrong everything. And imagine coming from Paris, where you might have just seen Rodin's The Kiss. This is the British equivalent. I mean, it says so much about.
Do you know how much it cost, Bendy?
No, I dread to think.
It cost £1 million.
Oh, you're joking.
No, £1 million. That was the budget for it. £1 million.
Travesty. And they look like lizards. Have you noticed there's something very peculiar about their face? It's a manifestation of a David Icke conspiracy theory. I find it very unsettling.
We just started the list, Bendy. We've got tragedies to come. Keep going.
Well, in third place, we have the statue of Sir Bobby Robson, which is by an artist called Tom Maley. I hope I've pronounced that right. And it's outside Newcastle United Football Ground in Newcastle. And we've put this in here because there are so many examples of terrible footballing statues in the country, aren't there? Every football ground in the nation seems to have one, at least, terrible bronze statues of someone from the glory days of the club in the past. This statue of Robson really is woeful.
It is. I mean, he's got his hands in his pockets, right? So he sort of looks like he's fiddling with himself, but you can't quite see where his hands are going. And he's standing there. And of course, I mean, the single worst thing about it, and this is, I think, a universal truth with football statues, the single worst thing about it is it doesn't look like Bobby Robson.
No.
The face could be anybody. It's like, it's not as bad as the Ronaldo. I mean, that's the perfect bad footballing sculpture. There's a great one of Mohamed Salah as well in Egypt. That was bad too. So they're not quite as bad as that. But in a reserved English way, they're of the same territory. They don't look like who they're meant to look like. And what they're expressing is a mystery to me. I mean, Bobby Robson, the poor guy, I mean, there are several Bobby Robsons. I mean, I go to football quite a bit, and there's one outside Ipswich Town as well, where he was a manager. And he seems to be sort of falling over drunk with one hand in the air. And what's he doing? It's a very unfortunate thing, the football sculpture. Yes, they're always bad. And I agree with you totally. I think the Bobby Robson in Newcastle, yes, it must be the sort of apex of the trend.
And unfortunately, the trend for terrible modern sculptures has left football and infected politics as well. And in second place, we have the truly, truly woeful statue of Lloyd George in Parliament Square by an artist called Glyn Williams. This is a monstrous toot of bronze, which has no place standing in the holy of holies of British political sculpture in Parliament Square. Have you seen it in the flesh?
I have, of course I have. Yes, I walk through Parliament Square often, and most of the statues there are pretty awful. I mean, even the Nelson Mandela, which we want so much to be good, isn't, in my opinion. I mean, he looks like some kind of zombie walking forwards with his arms outstretched, and it's tragic. It's tragic because if anybody deserves a great statue, it's Nelson Mandela. But yes, Lloyd George, I remember when they put it up, it was 2007, was it? Harold Pinter went into print immediately to call it a disgrace, didn't he? And I think Glenn Williams is a Welsh sculptor, isn't he? So I think that's what got him the gig. Welsh sculptor sculpts Welsh hero. But I mean, what's happening to Lloyd George in this picture? I mean, he's prancing about. He's got that kind of slightly Beryl Cookish outline, no detail to him. And what he lacks in any form at all, what he lacks, I think, is gravitas. I mean, that's what you want from a political statue, isn't it? Some sense of gravitas. I mean, this looks like a kid playing on the beach or something, that's springing about and jumping. Where do they find them? And I happen to know that one cost something extraordinary as well. I think it was about £325,000.
Oh, yes.
In Parliament Square, in front of the Houses of Parliament. It's a junkyard of bad sculpture. That whole Parliament Square.
But look at his hands; they're terrible, sort of podgy fingers, and there's awful billowing cloak coming out behind him, like he's just let off a particularly violent fart, and he's tottering at a rather alarming angle. I mean, it looks like something that's been scaled up from the size of a keyring, doesn't it? But it has no artistic dexterity in it anywhere, as far as I can see.
You're right. There is no artistic dexterity. It's a bit like it's not. We've talked about him before on this podcast, but Botero is a Colombian artist who has a statue in every square, and he does podgy people. Their hands are sort of podgy. They look like balloon people almost, if they've been blown up out of balloons. And that's where the detail disappears in this kind of podgy all-purposeness. And it's got that about it.
I'm
and
looking at it now.
You just don't know anything about Lloyd George when you look at this, do you? You learn nothing. You learn nothing. It doesn't look like him. It doesn't represent what he did. It's just him bouncing about like a kid on the beach. Terrible sculpture. Agree with you totally about that.
Hopefully it'll be replaced one day, because Lloyd George should have a good statue. Anyway, let's move on. The winner of the inaugural Waldy Bendy Award for Terrible UK Public Sculpture is Maggie Hambling for the statue called An Encounter with Oscar Wilde, just outside Trafalgar Square. And it's designed so that you can lie on it and have a conversation with Oscar as he's sitting there having his cigarette. Have you tried doing that?
I haven't tried having a conversation with him, but I've seen it enough times. Yes, I'm so happy that Maggie Hambling has made it onto this list as well as the other ones that she could have appeared on. I mean, I do think this is the worst possible type of public sculpture. I mean, Oscar Wilde, a wit, a brilliant mind, someone who was such a sort of ready presence in English culture, so elegant, so wispy. And here he is looking like some kind of down and out having a bath, with an Alf Garnett fag hanging out of his fingers. His face has no resemblance of any kind to Oscar Wilde. And it's all about Maggie Hambling and nothing about him. It's awful. And
he looks like he's emerging from a coffin, doesn't he?
Is it a coffin or a bath that he's lying in?
But it's the shape of a coffin. It looks like it looks like it's a sort of terrible reanimated ghost of Oscar Wilde is emerging from the ground of Trafalgar Square. And I don't know if you've ever, and you haven't tried to line it, but I haven't tried to line it, but I've sort of gone up and thought about it, and it tends to be covered in wee-wee, this thing, because it's a sort of convenient peeing place for the local inebriates, and it's almost got a terrible smell about it, and it's just, it's a disaster from start to finish.
It is a disaster, and I mean, that cost a bomb as well.
Is it?
Yes, I mean, but the worst thing about it again is, I mean, you look at that face there, the sort of blobby face, which looks as if it's suffering from leprosy, with stuff falling off the skin and the nose. There's no face left there, really. That is not Oscar Wilde. It doesn't look like Oscar Wilde. Surely, the basics of sculpture, there has to be some ambition for a resemblance. And I know, again, Maggie Hambling is probably going for a sort of symbolic thing, this conversation with him, as if you really are going to lie down on this tombstone with him and have a chat, while he's puffing cigarette smoke in your face. It's a misconceived, badly sculpted, stupidly positioned, far too expensive, and a waste of creative energy. I totally agree with you about that. It's the worst sculpture in Britain.
Well, congratulations of some kind are in order. And I have to say, I do like Maggie Hamling's paintings, so I'm a fan, and I regret her winning this inaugural Waldy and Bendy for Terrible Sculptor. But we should also remember that neither you nor I could make a sculptor if we had 1,000 years and 1,000 pieces of marble. We couldn't do it. So bravo to those who tried at least.
God, Bendy, you're generous. Well, that's enough of the bad news. I think we both need cheering up after all that, after the bad sculptures and the bad American art. This is the part of the podcast where we get to choose anything we want from the wonderful world of art to hang in our museum without walls during this period of isolation. So it's the fun bit of the podcast.
On the wall.
Bendor, yes, it's on the wall. Now, I'm sure you're going to come up with something good here, because let's face it, we need a bit of relief from what's come before. What have you chosen to hang on your wall, Bendor?
For our American special, I've chosen a painting by Winslow Homer, who I mentioned earlier, a truly American artist, and I think a very great one. This is a painting called A Visit from the Old Mistress, and it belongs to the Smithsonian Museum of American Art in Washington, D.C. It was painted in 1876, and it shows a group of 5 figures. 4 of them are African Americans, and on the right is a white figure. She is the old mistress, and she used to own the people on the left as slaves. But this painting is, of course, done after the emancipation of the slaves, after the American Civil War. And Winslow Homer emerged as an American artist by recording the years of the Civil War in graphic illustrations for magazines like Harper's Magazine. So he was there embedded with the Union troops for 4 years, and he absolutely saw everything. And about 10 years after the war ended, he went back to the South to record the lives of the former slaves and to see how things were changing, or rather not changing. And he did a series of paintings, and this is perhaps the most poignant. And I think it's really fascinating representation of the tension between former slaves and their employers, who used to, in fact, own them. So on the right, we have the former mistress, and you can see the hesitancy as she is coming to speak or perhaps request something of the former slaves. And you can see the former slaves standing at her with some boldness and confidence that they would never have previously had. And in fact, one of the figures is seated. And of course, back in the days of slavery, they would have had to have stood up whenever the mistress came to see them. And the year that this was painted is quite important. It was 1876. And that was also the year that the so-called Reconstruction ended in the southern states, and the northern armies withdrew. And of course, what had been a moment of promise for the former slaves rapidly became a descent back into the terrors of segregation in the South, which lasted for another 75 years at least. So Winslow Homer is recording a moment that could have gone either way. It could have led to the former slaves having parity and equality with white people, but unfortunately it didn't. And I think it's a fascinating moment in history.
Yeah, wonderful picture. Thank you. I didn't know it actually, and I found it very moving and indeed very powerful. I didn't know as well that Winslow Homer had worked as an illustrator. It's interesting because there's quite a few American artists that did that. I mean, I'm thinking later on George Bellows did, of course, Reginald Marsh, and it's as if the career of an artist didn't depend just on making great paintings that were on show in museums. You know, if you were a jobbing artist in America, you had to do other things, didn't you? So you had to make a living. So you had to work as an illustrator. You had to do stuff like that, painting murals, painting things, public murals. And what it gave your art, I think, is a sort of determination to confront society, to look at things properly. Because if you've been sent out as an illustrator to illustrate some kind of social issue or problem, you know, that's different from just sort of sitting there and thinking about what can I paint, which particular classical myth can I illustrate. And it made American art gritty, didn't it? And I know this is a rather poetic and beautiful image, but it's also got that sort of gritty undertow. And I like it very, very much. Thank you for showing me that.
Glad you liked it. And I agree with you. There are so many artists from that period, and that's why I mentioned Norman Rockwell earlier, who were able to tell such powerful stories in their pictures because that's what they'd done as basically as journalists. And what a moment of American history they lived through, from the Civil War to the First World War to the Second World War. So much change, and it's no wonder we have so many wonderful paintings like this.
Mm. Indeed, and I've leapt forward a bit. I've also, of course, this is our American special, so I'm sticking with America. I've gone for Dorothea Tanning, who's probably my favourite female surrealist painter. She was born in America in 1910 in a place called Galesburg, Illinois. A strict sort of Lutheran upbringing. There's a famous quote by her where she says that the only thing that happened in Galesburg was the wallpaper. And this picture here sort of illustrates that. I mean, it's got a couple of schoolgirls in torn dresses, and they're attacking the wall, literally attacking the wall, tearing the wallpaper off. And underneath the wallpaper are these ambiguous organic-y shapes. I mean, they look like they could be bits of body, they could be invading triffids. Something dark and invasive is being unveiled. So the idea, I guess, is that underneath this wallpaper there's this other stuff happening. And Dorothea Tanning's entire oeuvre really is about this idea that the world is one thing on the surface and another thing underneath that surface. And she makes it very personal in these pictures of herself, or I always see them as herself, even if they're not specifically meant to be her. This idea of a young schoolgirl or schoolgirls, young girls, growing up in these repressed situations and sort of lashing out. So it's a dark and strange image, and to make it all even darker and stranger, lying on the bottom, you just see the legs of someone who's, I don't know, are they dead? Are they sleeping? Is it another girl? So it's a fraught picture, and it's a picture. It's actually called The Children's Games, and it's a painting about children in a seemingly innocent situation, little girls, as it were, at play, and yet the play is so dark and mysterious and charged. So that unsettled feeling is what the best surrealist artists had. And I just see it as a wonderful evocation, really, of America. It was painted in 1942, but it represents that whole underpinning of, on the surface, you have this very regular and polite society, and underneath there's all this other stuff bubbling through. So I thought it's a kind of commentary on what's happening in America now, isn't it, I think? And so that's why I've chosen it. But also because Dorothea Tanning is so wonderful. And she lived to be 101. Isn't that amazing? Lived to be 101. What a wonderful artist she was.
I find this a rather terrifying picture. It looks like a scene from The Shining, doesn't it? The composition reminded me of Munch's The Scream. Do you think that's deliberate?
I don't think so, but I think she would have known about him, and the timbre of it, the mood of it, has got some Munch in it. This sense of the world gone crazy. And it is terrifying, and she did a lot of her art is set in rooms, in strange hallways with doors that you open, and it's all a bit Hitchcocky. You just sort of feel every time you open a door there might be some monster hiding behind. So there is that sense of disquiet, permanent disquiet, that nothing's nice. Everything is loaded with potential terror. Wonderful artist.
Well, you wouldn't look at it before you went to bed from your lockdown gallery, but perhaps it'll get you going in the morning with your first coffee.
It will, and it also reminds me of America, which is what we've been trying to tackle with this chaotic podcast of ours today, Bendy. We set out to do the impossible, and we didn't come anywhere near achieving it. But that's life, and that's certainly, in a curious way, that does feel sort of the right kind of approach, given what's happening in America at the moment. But that's enough from me. God knows I've babbled. So from me, it's goodbye.
And cheerio from me.
Waldy and Bendy.